The morning sun glinted off the calm waters of Naval Station Norfolk, casting long, shimmering reflections across the steel hulls of battleships and destroyers docked along the pier. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs adjusted the brim of his cover and stood at attention, eyes scanning every inch of the restricted area. The base was the largest in the world, a sprawling complex of steel, concrete, and hidden power, and Briggs knew every day he stood at this post, he carried a responsibility heavier than most could imagine. The Marine Corps didn't just hand out authority. It demanded vigilance, discipline, and, above all, respect. Briggs had been at the pier for nearly 3 hours, the cold morning wind tugging at his uniform as he shifted weight from one boot to the other. His eyes were trained, his mind alert, yet there was a subtle tension in his muscles, an itch that came when a Marine sensed something was off. And then he saw the man. He appeared from the far end of the pier, walking with the measured calm of someone who had spent years moving through authority and power. The older man wore plain civilian clothes, a soft gray jacket over a casual shirt, well-worn slacks, and polished shoes that clicked against the concrete as he approached. There was nothing about his appearance that immediately demanded respect, yet something in the way he moved suggested he was no ordinary visitor. Briggs stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. "Restricted area. Identification, please," he barked, his voice echoing slightly against the steel hulls. The man stopped, slowly turning his head to meet Briggs' gaze. His eyes were sharp, unflinching, steady. They were eyes that had seen more than most could imagine, eyes that measured confidence, fear, and arrogance alike. For a heartbeat, the Marine hesitated, sensing a presence that felt larger than the simple silhouette before him. "I'm expected," the man said quietly, his voice calm, almost gentle, but carrying the kind of authority that made Briggs' throat tighten. Briggs' pride flared. He had been trained to command respect, not bow to it. "By who?" he demanded, stepping closer. The muscles in his jaw tightened. Sailors and dock workers nearby paused, sensing the confrontation brewing, drawn by the tension that seemed to ripple like electricity along the pier. The man didn't answer immediately, a pause that stretched long enough for Briggs' irritation to grow. He took a small, deliberate step closer, and his voice hardened just slightly. "What's your rank?" The words hung in the air, sharp, cutting, a challenge wrapped in sarcasm. Briggs' chest tightened. His hands flexed at his sides. He had asked for identification. This Marine pride, his sense of duty, made him expect compliance, not insolence. A laugh echoed from a distant dock, sailors whispering, curious eyes now fully fixed on the unfolding scene. The older man's lips curled in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. There was no anger in his expression, only the quiet certainty of someone who had lived long enough to know the weight of every word. Before Briggs could respond, the low rumble of engines rolled over the pier. Black SUVs emerged from the side gate, their polished surfaces reflecting the sunlight. The sound was commanding, unnatural for the usually tranquil morning, and it immediately drew every pair of eyes toward the approaching vehicles. Sailors instinctively straightened, some raising their hands to their covers in respect. Briggs' pulse quickened. He glanced at the man again, expecting him to move or signal something, anything. But the man remained perfectly still, calm as the approaching threat of authority grew louder and closer. The SUVs came to a smooth stop behind the civilian, doors opening in perfect sequence. 3 men in full dress uniforms stepped out, medals flashing, stars gleaming. They moved with precision, every motion synchronized, every step deliberate. The Marine felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen admirals before on ceremonial visits, but something about these men, their exact timing and commanding presence, made the pier feel smaller, tighter, more suffocating. They approached the civilian, walking with purpose, eyes forward, hands at their sides. Briggs instinctively stepped back a fraction, a strange mixture of curiosity and growing apprehension taking hold. Then, in unison, the 3 admirals snapped to attention and saluted the man. "Admiral Halstead, sir. one said in a voice strong and reverent. Briggs' blood ran cold. Admiral Charles Halstead, the quiet hammer of the United States Navy, a man whose very name carried decades of naval legend, stood in front of him, and the man he had mocked, the one he had dared to question, was the reason. The older man returned the salute, not with ceremony, but with calm authority, the gesture almost casual, yet powerful enough to command silence from everyone present. Briggs felt a flush rise to his face, a mixture of fear, embarrassment, and awe. He realized he had just confronted a man who had shaped naval strategy across decades, a man whose decisions could tilt the balance of power on a global scale. "Marine," Halstead said quietly, his voice carrying across the still morning air, "confidence is admirable. Arrogance is dangerous." The word struck deeper than any reprimand could have. Briggs' chest tightened as he straightened, standing at attention despite his embarrassment. Sailors around him exchanged glances, some smirking, others nodding in respect for the Marine's composure under the growing tension. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the docks holding their collective breath. Briggs realized this was more than a challenge of protocol. It was a test of judgment, composure, and, ultimately, character. The man he had mocked, the one who appeared so ordinary, was a force Briggs had only glimpsed in stories and briefings, a living embodiment of decades of strategy, discipline, and command. Before Briggs could even find the right words, Halstead's gaze swept past him, calm, measured, unyielding. The Marine understood in an instant. This encounter would change the course of his day, his career, perhaps even his understanding of leadership itself. The engines of the SUVs hummed softly as Halstead's presence dominated the pier, and for the first time, Briggs felt the weight of his own rank and the lessons it had yet to teach him. The morning air at Naval Station Norfolk carried the faint tang of salt and diesel, the hum of distant ship engines punctuating the tension building on the pier. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs stood rigid, chest tightening, as his eyes tracked the approaching black SUVs. His fingers twitched near the holster of his sidearm, not from aggression, but from anticipation. Something about the precise timing of the vehicles, the almost militaristic rhythm of their approach, made him instinctively straighten. The vehicle slowed to a smooth halt behind the civilian, the man Briggs had questioned so boldly. Doors opened in perfect synchrony, and 3 uniformed officers emerged. Their uniforms gleamed under the morning sun, ribbons and medals catching every ray, reflecting decades of service and sacrifice. Stars on their shoulders announced rank before their words could. These were admirals, not ceremonial visitors or minor commanders. They radiated authority so intensely that the pier seemed smaller, tighter, as if their presence compressed the air. The 3 officers moved with purpose toward the older man, steps deliberate and precise. Each motion was a statement. They were here, they knew their mission, and they carried the weight of the United States Navy with them. Briggs felt his confidence waver. He had imagined power before, but this was not imagined. It was palpable, a force that demanded attention. Sailors and dock workers nearby instinctively stopped what they were doing, some raising their hands to their covers, others simply watching, knowing they were witnessing a rare display of respect and protocol converging in real time. Briggs' mind raced. Who was this man? He had assumed a contractor or retired officer, nothing to worry about. But the precision, the quiet authority, the way the admirals moved toward him, it all spoke of someone extraordinary. Then came the moment that froze every breath on the pier. In perfect unison, the 3 admirals snapped to attention and saluted the civilian. The gesture was flawless, rehearsed, yet full of respect. "Admiral Halstead, sir," one said, voice firm, reverent, echoing slightly off the hulls of the docked ships. Briggs' stomach dropped. Admiral Charles Halstead, the quiet hammer legend of the United States Navy, strategist of critical Cold War operations, a man who had commanded fleets and influenced global policy, stood silently before him. And the man he had mocked, That man was Admiral Halstead himself. The civilian returned the salute with a casual precision, a calm that contrasted sharply with the taut formality of the three admirals. Briggs' mouth went dry. His mind scrambled to reconcile the figure he had dismissed with the legend now standing only a few feet away. Every sailor on the pier seemed frozen in the moment. Conversation ceased mid-word. Dock workers paused, hands gripping railings. Even the gulls seemed to hesitate in flight. The silence was absolute, save for the faint sound of the waves lapping against the hulls and the distant thrum of engines. Briggs' earlier bravado evaporated instantly. His chest felt tight. His pride, once inflamed by imagined authority, now shrank under the weight of reality. He had asked for rank, mocked the man's appearance, and now he realized he was standing before someone whose decisions had shaped naval history. The civilian's eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Briggs with quiet appraisal. There was no anger, no malice, only an evaluation, a weighing of character. Briggs felt exposed under that gaze, yet oddly, not humiliated, challenged. "Marine," Halstead said, voice calm but commanding, carrying clearly over the quiet pier. "Confidence is admirable. Arrogance is dangerous." Briggs' ears burned. The words struck deeper than any reprimand or threat of disciplinary action could. They were not just a correction, they were a lesson, a reminder of what real authority looked like. And he had just tested it. Halstead turned slightly to the three admirals, who remained at rigid attention. Without another word, they stepped back in formation, still holding their salute, still radiating the discipline and unity that made the Navy's hierarchy unmistakable. Briggs felt a strange mix of awe and intimidation. He realized this was not a moment of authority being displayed. It was a moment of respect earned, even by mere presence. He glanced at the civilian again. For the first time, Briggs noticed subtle signs of experience etched in the man's face. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the controlled movement of his shoulders, the quiet decisiveness in his stance. This was a man who had commanded fleets, navigated crises, and carried responsibility that could alter global events. And yet he stood simply, silently, letting the others' respect speak for him. The crowd on the pier, sailors and civilians alike, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Whispers traveled like currents. "That's Halstead. That's Charles Halstead." Even those who had only heard his name in briefings now witnessed him in person, and the effect was immediate. Authority, they realized, could be understated yet absolute. Briggs straightened instinctively, realizing that every action he had taken, every word, every step, was now under scrutiny. His earlier mockery, his brash question, his assumption of the stranger's insignificance, it all seemed trivial now, almost naive. He felt a pulse of both fear and excitement. Fear, because he had been wrong. Excitement, because he was now in the presence of history, a living embodiment of everything he aspired to in his career. Halstead finally lowered his hand, breaking the salute, though his gaze remained firm, measuring. "You may want to consider your words more carefully, Marine," he said softly, yet every syllable carried authority. "And your assumptions, even more so." Briggs swallowed hard, nodding. He had learned in a single moment that appearances could deceive, that true rank and respect were earned through experience and responsibility, not posture or arrogance. The SUVs idled quietly behind them, engines humming, carrying the promise of further authority, missions, and decisions beyond Briggs' comprehension. The pier seemed to exhale collectively, as if the tension had reached its peak and was slowly dissipating. Briggs took a steadying breath. He was no longer just a Marine at a guard post. He was standing at the threshold of a world far larger than the one he knew, a world where decisions could ripple across oceans and lives depended on composure, judgment, and courage. The morning sun reflected off the steel of the nearby ships, illuminating the weight of responsibility, and Briggs understood in that charged silence that this encounter would shape the trajectory of his career, and perhaps the rest of his life. The morning sun had climbed higher over Naval Station Norfolk, casting long, precise shadows across the pier. The black SUVs hummed quietly behind Admiral Halstead, now at ease, yet commanding an invisible tension that filled the air. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs stood rigid, hands clenched at his sides, chest tight with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The morning had started like any other, a routine guard post, a sense of pride in doing one's duty. But the events of the last few minutes had shattered every expectation he had about rank, authority, and respect. He had anticipated punishment. At the very least, a stern lecture, perhaps a formal reprimand, maybe even paperwork that would follow him through his career. Instead, Halstead spoke calmly, almost casually, yet every word carried the gravity of decades of naval experience. "I want this Marine assigned to my operations team," Halstead said, his voice steady, cutting through the quiet hum of the pier. The words sent a ripple of murmurs across the gathered sailors. Briggs froze. Assign him to the legendary Admiral Halstead. It sounded absurd. A Marine at the pier, barely past recruit training, now being pulled into a high-level operation. He could hardly process it. His mind spun with conflicting emotions, fear, pride, and an undercurrent of disbelief. One of the admirals nodded to Halstead, eyes sharp, movements flawless. "Understood, sir," he said, and Briggs realized this wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, an opportunity that most Marines could only dream of, but also a responsibility heavier than any he had carried. They moved toward the base's command center, a fortified building humming with activity, monitors blinking with real-time intelligence feeds, secure communications, and satellite imagery. Inside, the atmosphere was different from the pier's open air. The tension was tangible, concentrated in the low hum of machinery and the soft, purposeful footsteps of officers moving between terminals. Briggs' heart raced, each beat echoing the enormity of the assignment. Halstead didn't waste time with pleasantries. The situation was critical. Intelligence had detected increased naval activity in the Pacific, an unknown but potentially hostile fleet moving toward international waters where U.S. assets were already deployed. Communications had been disrupted in certain sectors, leaving ships vulnerable to miscalculated maneuvers or misinterpretation of hostile intent. A single wrong signal could ignite conflict. Briggs listened, absorbing terminology he had only encountered in training manuals. Satellite feeds displayed small, flickering shapes, ships, submarines, aircraft, all moving across vast stretches of ocean. Every command relayed from this room could determine whether a crisis escalated or was diffused. Halstead's calm presence dominated the room. There was no hysteria, no panic, only a focused, deliberate approach to assessing every threat, evaluating every decision point. He moved between stations with measured precision, occasionally pausing to issue a single word of guidance or to verify data. For someone who had commanded fleets and influenced the outcome of delicate international crises, he seemed almost understated, yet his authority was undeniable. Briggs was assigned to communications, specifically, ensuring that secure transmissions between fleet command and deployed ships remained unbroken. The task was technical, demanding, and unforgiving. A dropped signal could mean a misinterpreted command, a misstep, or worse. His training had prepared him for routine operations, but nothing like this. Nothing where lives, national security, and the delicate balance of diplomacy hung on his ability to keep channels clear. As he took his post, Briggs realized he was being tested, not just for skill but for composure. Halstead's gaze swept over him occasionally, evaluating, weighing, silent in a way that made the Marine acutely aware of his own limitations. Each beep, each flicker on the screen seemed magnified, every decision carrying potential consequence. Time stretched. Monitors flickered with updates from vessels reporting position, movement, and potential threats. Cybersecurity alerts blinked intermittently, some minor, some critical. Briggs worked quickly, following the protocols drilled into him during training, improvising where necessary, recalibrating lines when static threatened communication. His nerves were taut, yet he was starting to understand the rhythm, the unspoken coordination required to maintain order in such a high-stakes environment. Halstead occasionally leaned over Briggs' station, quiet questions that required fast, precise answers. Each interaction was a test, one that Briggs realized he could not afford to fail. There was no room for hesitation, no margin for error. And yet, under the Admiral's calm presence, the Marine found a strange clarity, a focus that sharpened with every passing moment. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a tangible force. Every transmission, every acknowledgement, every rerouted signal was a thread in a complex tapestry of strategy. A misstep could send ships into conflict. A delay could be catastrophic. And all the while, the three admirals observed, moving through the command center like shadows of authority, ensuring that every action aligned with Halstead's vision. Hours seemed to compress into minutes. Briggs barely noticed the sun climbing higher outside the fortified windows. He was aware only of the hum of technology, the flashing monitors, the occasional clipped commands, and the silent pressure of being observed by one of the most respected figures in naval history. The fear of inadequacy was palpable, but so was the exhilarating realization that he was trusted with responsibility few Marines ever experienced. By midday, Briggs had begun to find his rhythm. Lines of communication that had previously faltered were now stable. Signals moved seamlessly between ships and command. The Admiral nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and Briggs felt a rush of quiet pride. He knew this was only the beginning. The crisis had not yet escalated to its peak, but he also understood that he had already passed a threshold, proving that he could operate under pressure without faltering. Halstead's calm voice broke through the hum. "Marine, keep your focus. The situation will test everyone here. Remain steady and trust your training." Briggs straightened, exhaled, and nodded. The assignment was daunting, yes, but it was also an honor. He was no longer just a Marine at a guard post. He was part of a team whose decisions could shape the course of history. The weight of authority, the responsibility, the tension, it all converged in that moment, and Briggs felt the first flicker of true understanding. This was the crucible of leadership. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, oblivious to the human drama unfolding on the pier. But inside the command center, every heartbeat mattered. Every flicker of light on the monitors was a pulse of life, a signal of action, a test of courage and competence. And Briggs knew that in the next hours, he would be judged not for arrogance or pride, but for composure, clarity, and the quiet ability to hold the line when the world demanded it most. The command center hummed with activity, the constant flicker of monitors reflecting off polished consoles and the steel walls. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs sat at his station, eyes darting between screens showing live feeds from ships, radar blips, and encrypted communications. The air was thick with tension, a taut cord strung tight over the Pacific stretching thousands of miles. This was no training exercise. Every signal, every message, every heartbeat could ripple across oceans, shaping decisions no single Marine could undo. "Incoming report from the destroyer," a communications officer announced, voice steady but tight. Briggs' fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to relay or reroute encrypted messages. The monitor displayed the USS Princeton's position. Foreign vessels had been detected closing fast, moving unpredictably through international waters. Their intentions were unclear. Admiral Halstead stood at the center of the room, his posture calm, almost casual, but every step radiated authority. He scanned the reports, his eyes flicking over every detail with the precision of decades in command. Officers whispered recommendations, some calling for immediate tactical maneuvers, others advocating restraint. The room was alive with conflicting advice, the hum of decision-making vibrating like electricity through the walls. Briggs realized the gravity of his assignment. Any miscommunication could escalate the situation. If a signal were delayed, misread, or scrambled, a misstep could lead to international incident, or worse, open conflict. Sweat prickled on his forehead as he focused on maintaining clear channels, ensuring each transmission passed securely and precisely. Suddenly, the communications lines flickered, a wave of static consuming critical channels. The warning lights on his console blinked red. Briggs' pulse surged. This was the moment his training had warned him for, though nothing could fully prepare anyone for the reality of watching the lines of war teeter on the edge of miscommunication. "Marine Briggs," Halstead said quietly, his voice calm but piercing. "Status." Briggs responded immediately, keeping his voice steady despite the surge of adrenaline. "Sir, primary communications are disrupted. Signals are being scrambled. Ships may not receive updates." Halstead's gaze remained steady, unflinching. "Secondary channels." Briggs checked, rerouting through backup satellites. "Estimated restoration, 60 seconds, sir." Halstead nodded once. "Do it." 60 seconds felt like an eternity. Outside the fortified walls, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, a silent theater of potential chaos. The blips on the radar pulsed faster, the unidentified fleet's movements erratic. Every officer in the room held their breath, understanding the thin line between deterrence and disaster. Briggs worked quickly, manually recalibrating encryption protocols and rerouting communication through backup channels. Each keystroke carried the weight of responsibility. One mistake, one missed signal, and the destroyer could misinterpret instructions, possibly firing preemptively or moving dangerously close to foreign vessels. His hands shook slightly, but his focus sharpened with each correction. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 45 seconds, 30, 20. Halstead observed silently, his expression unreadable, eyes flicking between the radar and Briggs' console. The tension in the room was almost suffocating. Every second was critical. Every decision, every flicker on the screen could tip the balance. Finally, the static cleared. The USS Princeton confirmed reception of updated orders. Briggs exhaled slowly, tension draining slightly from his body. Halstead's eyes softened just a fraction, a subtle acknowledgement that the Marine had held under pressure. "Maintain formation," Halstead instructed, voice calm but firm. "Do not escalate, show strength but do not provoke." Briggs relayed the commands, routing them to all ships in the affected zone. He monitored responses, ensuring each vessel executed the maneuvers correctly. The foreign ships adjusted course, radar blips shifting slightly but no aggressive action taken. The crisis had, for now, stabilized, but the room remained taut, each officer acutely aware that any sudden move could reignite tension. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Officers exchanged whispered updates and Briggs remained at his post, hands steady now, mind alert, every nerve attuned to the rhythm of operations. He felt the weight of the moment. He was no longer a Marine guarding a pier. He was a vital link in a chain that spanned oceans, connecting commanders, captains, and ships in a delicate ballet of strategy and restraint. Halstead moved among the officers, listening, questioning, directing. He asked Briggs for updates, confirming secure channels, and occasionally glanced at the radar, eyes sharp, calculating. "Good," he said quietly at one point, "but remain vigilant. The enemy does not rest." The flickering blips on the monitor kept the room on edge. The unidentified fleet continued to move erratically, testing the patience and precision of the U.S. forces. Every transmission, every adjustment of ship formation, was a potential deterrent or a potential spark. Briggs understood that missteps could escalate the situation to conflict before diplomacy even had a chance. As the sun climbed higher, casting light across the room, Briggs felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. He had never felt so exposed, so responsible, and yet so alive. This was a test of nerve, skill, and composure, a trial that would define not only his abilities but his understanding of leadership and responsibility. Finally, a sigh of relief spread through the room. The foreign vessel's movement stabilized. Radar locks disengaged, and ships adjusted without incident. Halstead gave a subtle nod of approval to the Marine at the communications console. Briggs met his gaze, realizing that in these quiet moments, leadership revealed itself, not through loud commands but through calm judgment and careful restraint. Outside, the Pacific continued its endless expanse, oblivious to the human drama unfolding thousands of miles away. Inside, every heartbeat mattered. Every flicker of light on a monitor, every transmitted signal, had shaped the trajectory of the day. Briggs understood at last the magnitude of responsibility he had been thrust into, and the silent lessons the quiet hammer was imparting: discipline, patience, and the unyielding power of calm under pressure. The crisis was temporarily stabilized, but Briggs knew this was only the beginning. The tension was far from over. The real test had just begun, and in the calm, watchful presence of Admiral Halstead, he realized that he was not just observing history, he was helping write it. The command center hummed with focused activity, monitors casting flickering light across tense faces and polished consoles. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs' fingers flew across the keyboard, routing encrypted communications with a precision born of necessity. Outside, the Pacific stretched endlessly, a calm veneer over a dangerous reality. The USS Princeton and its sister ships were repositioning cautiously, but radar blips indicated hostile vessels continuing their unpredictable maneuvers. One wrong move, one delayed transmission, could ignite a conflict before anyone had time to react. Every second felt like a lifetime. Suddenly, alarms blared. Briggs' console blinked red. Cyber interference was scrambling key communication lines. Messages from deployed ships were garbled, orders unreadable. The room erupted in tense murmurs as officers scrambled to assess the threat. Halstead's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding. "Status report." Briggs' pulse pounded in his ears. "Sir, primary channels are down. Communications are scrambled. Ships may not receive critical updates." The Admiral's gaze swept over him. "Secondary channels. Rerouting through satellite backups now. Estimated restoration in 30 seconds, sir." Halstead nodded once. "Do it." Briggs worked frantically, manually recalibrating encryption, rerouting messages through secure channels, his training guiding every motion. Sweat dripped down his temple, but his hands were steady. One error now could cascade into disaster. He imagined the destroyer acting on incomplete information, missiles armed, crews unaware of changes in formation. A single misstep could trigger war. Officers hovered nearby, tension radiating from their posture. Halstead observed silently, assessing the Marine's ability to perform under pressure. Briggs could feel the weight of the Admiral's gaze, a silent challenge: succeed or risk catastrophe. 20 seconds. 15. The static persisted, gnawing at Briggs' concentration. He could hear the faint hum of the servers, the soft thrum of engines outside, and the tension in the room seemed to compress time itself. Every eye was on him now, the lines between life, duty, and potential disaster as thin as the blink of an eye. Finally, connection restored. The USS Princeton's captain confirmed reception of updated orders. Briggs exhaled, tension draining slightly, his mind still racing with adrenaline. Halstead allowed a faint nod of acknowledgement. Briggs felt the subtle weight of approval, an unspoken recognition of competence under extreme stress. The Admiral immediately issued new instructions. Maintain formation, hold positions, display readiness but avoid escalation. Briggs relayed the commands, ensuring that each vessel in the fleet executed maneuvers with precision. Radar blips shifted as ships adjusted positions, demonstrating strength without aggression. The hostile fleet altered course slightly, a cautious acknowledgement of U.S. naval presence. Crisis averted for now, but the room remained taut, every officer aware that the next misstep could reignite tension. Briggs' training kicked in fully. He monitored multiple channels, cross-checking encrypted messages, ensuring no further interference. His nerves, once frayed, now focused like a sharpened blade. Every update, every ping of communication carried the weight of lives at sea. The stakes were monumental, and yet in the controlled chaos he found clarity. Halstead approached Briggs quietly, eyes scanning monitors while speaking in low tones to other officers. He issued brief directives, subtly adjusting strategy. His calm presence was magnetic, an anchor in the storm of tension. Briggs realized that leadership was not just about issuing commands. It was about maintaining composure, providing direction without panic, and trusting subordinates to act decisively when needed. Minutes passed. Every transmission went smoothly. Ships repositioned without incident. The threat of immediate conflict began to recede, though the underlying tension remained. Briggs noticed subtle glances exchanged between Halstead and the Admirals, calculations, assessments, adjustments, all performed without a word, a silent coordination that spoke volumes of experience and skill. Finally, Halstead addressed the room. "Well done, but this is far from over. Maintain vigilance. The situation is fluid and we cannot assume the enemy will remain predictable." Briggs leaned back slightly, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. His hands still trembled faintly, adrenaline surging through him. He had just prevented a potential crisis, but the enormity of the responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. He realized that success under pressure required more than technical skill. It demanded focus, courage, and unwavering composure. For the first time, Briggs understood the true nature of leadership and responsibility. Rank and authority were not measured by insignia alone, but by the ability to act decisively when stakes were highest. Every decision mattered, every action carried consequence. In this room on this day, he was not merely a Marine at a post. He was a critical link in the chain of command, entrusted with the safety of lives and the prevention of conflict. The monitors continued to display flickering blips, the subtle movements of ships in the Pacific, a reminder that danger never fully subsided. Yet for a moment the room exhaled, tension easing slightly. Briggs felt a quiet pride, tempered by respect for the enormity of the situation. He had survived his first trial by fire, proving his ability to act under pressure, and earning, for the first time, the subtle acknowledgement of one of the Navy's most legendary figures. Halstead's calm, deliberate gaze met Briggs'. "You acted well under pressure. That is what earns respect, Marine, not arrogance but competence." Briggs straightened, shoulders back, eyes meeting the Admiral's steady stare. He realized he had crossed a threshold. No longer a young Marine making assumptions. He had faced real danger, executed critical tasks flawlessly, and survived the crucible. He understood now that every action, every command, and every decision had weight, and that composure under pressure was the mark of true professionalism. Outside the fortified walls, the Pacific remained deceptively calm, waves lapping against hulls oblivious to the drama playing out. But inside, the human element, the skill, courage, and nerve of those who carried responsibility, had kept disaster at bay. Briggs knew that the coming hours would bring further tests, but he also understood that he had earned the first measure of trust and respect. The quiet hammer had spoken without words, tested without ceremony, and recognized without fanfare. And Briggs, heart still racing, realized that he had passed his first trial by fire. The adrenaline of the morning had ebbed, leaving behind a palpable tension that seemed to hang over the command center like a heavy fog. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs sat at his console, fingers resting lightly on the keys, monitors still displaying the subtle movements of the fleet in the Pacific. Though the immediate crisis had passed, the sense of vigilance never left. Every blinking radar blip, every minor communication ping, reminded him that the ocean was a stage of constant uncertainty, and every action, or inaction, could ripple into catastrophe. Admiral Halstead remained in the room, though his presence was quieter now. He moved with the measured grace of a man who had commanded fleets, his gaze scanning consoles, his eyes noting every detail without words. Yet his presence was unmistakable, an anchor in the shifting tide of tension. Briggs realized the quiet authority was more powerful than any shouted order. It commanded attention, demanded focus, and instilled discipline without raising a voice. The Marine exhaled slowly, trying to steady his racing heart. The morning had been a trial unlike any he had imagined, each moment stretching his nerves, testing his skill, and forcing him to act decisively under pressure. He replayed every action, rerouting the compromised communications, recalibrating encryption protocols, coordinating with ship captains across thousands of miles of ocean. Each decision had been critical. Each second mattered. And yet, through it all, Halstead had observed silently, offering no immediate judgment, only the expectation that Briggs would rise to the challenge. "Marine Briggs," Halstead said finally, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority, "you've performed admirably today." Briggs straightened immediately, snapping to attention. "Thank you, sir," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite lingering adrenaline. Halstead nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful, unreadable. He took a slow step closer, letting his gaze settle on Briggs. "Do you understand what you just did?" he asked. Briggs hesitated, unsure how to answer. He had acted, he had succeeded, but understanding, that was something else entirely. I restored communications, sir. I ensured the fleet maintained proper positioning. I followed protocol." Halstead's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Yes, all true, but understanding goes deeper. What you did today was more than following orders. You held the line under pressure. You made decisions that impacted lives, not just equipment or procedures. That is the essence of leadership." Briggs felt a shiver run down his spine. Leadership. He had heard the word countless times in training, in lectures, in manuals. But here, in the quiet aftermath of a near crisis, he felt its weight. It wasn't rank, it wasn't titles or medals, it was responsibility. It was the ability to act when every instinct screamed uncertainty, to remain calm when chaos threatened to overwhelm, to make decisions that balanced risk with necessity. Halstead's gaze softened slightly. "Confidence is easy when you feel secure. Arrogance is dangerous when it blinds you to the stakes. What you showed today was a start. You remained focused, adaptable, and composed. That is earned, Marine, not given." Briggs swallowed hard, realizing the truth in those words. He had entered the day with bravado, with a sense of authority rooted in rank and training. But true competence had nothing to do with uniforms or bravado. It was about judgment, composure, and the courage to act decisively when the stakes were highest. The Admiral continued, packing slowly through the room, eyes occasionally flicking to the monitors. "Leadership is quiet, Ethan. It doesn't always shout. It doesn't demand recognition. It is tested in moments like this, when the world is balanced on the decisions of those who act without hesitation, who think clearly, and who accept responsibility for the consequences." Briggs felt the weight of Halstead's words pressing into him, shaping his understanding, altering the way he viewed his role as a Marine. Every action, every choice, carried significance far beyond what he had imagined. Even a small hesitation could have catastrophic effects. He realized that morning arrogance on the pier was nothing compared to the responsibility he now carried. Halstead stopped near Briggs' console, letting silence stretch between them. Finally, he placed a firm hand on the Marine's shoulder. "You corrected your mistakes by standing your post under pressure. That matters more than you realize. Pride can mislead, discipline and composure cannot. Remember that." Briggs nodded, heart still pounding but mind clearing. The lesson was indelible. Rank, power, and appearances were meaningless without responsibility. Authority was measured by the ability to act effectively under pressure, to make decisions that protected lives, and to maintain calm when chaos threatened. The room began to quiet as officers returned to monitoring the fleet. The immediate crisis had subsided, but the underlying tension persisted, a reminder that the ocean was vast, unpredictable, and unrelenting. Briggs remained at his station, not out of fear, but with a newfound understanding of his place in the chain of command and the role he played in something far larger than himself. Halstead glanced toward the monitors once more, then back at Briggs. "Remember, Marine, today you learned more than procedure. You learned the essence of responsibility. Carry it with you. Every mission, every operation, every action requires more than skill. It requires judgment, restraint, and the courage to accept consequences." Briggs felt a quiet swell of respect, not only for the Admiral but for the weight of duty itself. He understood that humility was not weakness, it was awareness. Confidence without arrogance, composure under pressure, and dedication to the mission above self, all were qualities that separated Marines from leaders. The quiet hammer had spoken again, not with orders, not with harsh words, but through presence, observation, and subtle guidance. Briggs felt the lesson sink in deeply, its significance expanding in his mind like ripples across the ocean. Today had tested him and he had passed, but more importantly, he had begun to understand what it meant to be a true Marine, disciplined, responsible, and aware of the power each decision held. For the first time, he felt worthy of his uniform in a way that went beyond pride. Worthiness was earned in moments of pressure, in quiet adherence to duty, and in understanding the lives his actions affected. And as Halstead prepared to step away, Briggs realized that the lessons of this day would resonate far longer than any medal, any commendation, or any fleeting recognition. The Pacific outside the base remained calm, waves glinting in the sunlight, masking the unseen tension that had defined the morning. Inside, lessons had been learned, growth had occurred, and Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs, once confident in superficial authority, had begun the slow, quiet journey to true leadership. Days passed since the near crisis on the Pacific, but the hum of the command center remained constant, a quiet reminder that the world's balance was fragile and vigilance never ended. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs had returned to his communications station, yet everything had changed. The Marine who had once guarded a pier with youthful bravado now understood the gravity of responsibility, and his hands moved with steady purpose, routing messages and monitoring ships with precision. Each keystroke carried weight, and he approached the task with a careful awareness that the lives of sailors rested in the accuracy of his actions. Word of Briggs' performance during the incident had quietly spread through the ranks. Officers whispered reports in hallways, nodding the Marine who had restored communication under extreme pressure, preventing a possible escalation with foreign naval forces. No public announcements, no ceremonial accolades, just professional respect, earned silently and recognized by those who understood the stakes. Briggs felt a subtle shift in the way colleagues regarded him. Sailors and officers approached him with a quiet nod, a hint of acknowledgement in their tone. It was not admiration for courage under fire alone, but recognition of competence, focus, and the ability to maintain calm when chaos threatened. Every look and whispered comment reinforced the lessons he had learned under Admiral Halstead's quiet guidance. Halstead, having completed his temporary recall, prepared to return to retirement. The operation that had brought him back to the Pacific had been stabilized, the crisis averted, and his presence was no longer required. Yet before leaving, he requested a final formation on the pier where it had all begun. Briggs stood at attention once more, now in full dress blues, posture perfect but different, calmer, more disciplined, carrying a newfound awareness of leadership and responsibility. The formation was composed of sailors, Marines, and officers from various branches, standing rigid in the warm sunlight. The fleet, a backdrop of steel and power, reflected the quiet authority of the U.S. Navy. Briggs' eyes scanned the faces of those assembled, recalling the arrogance and impatience that had marked the morning when he first questioned the civilian on the pier. The memory was sharp, a reminder of how far he had come in understanding rank, respect, and responsibility. Halstead approached, flanked by the three admirals who had initially saluted him. The scene was solemn yet understated, a ceremonial acknowledgement without the pomp of medals or speeches. The admiral stopped before Briggs, eyes meeting his with the quiet intensity that had defined their interactions since that fateful morning. "You've grown, Marine," Halstead said, voice calm, carrying the weight of decades of command. "You've demonstrated composure, skill, and judgment. Today, you are not the same Marine who mocked a legend. Today, you are part of something larger than yourself, and you've earned the respect that comes with that understanding." Briggs' chest tightened, and for the first time he felt the full significance of Halstead's words. It wasn't rank that mattered nor public accolades. It was trust. Competence under pressure had earned him a place among those who understood the stakes of global operations. It was quiet recognition, invisible to most, yet profoundly validating. The Admiral nodded to the three officers beside him. They snapped to attention once more, a mirrored gesture that conveyed unity, respect, and authority. To the assembled formation it was ceremonial, to Briggs it was personal. For the first time he understood the power of subtle acknowledgement, the depth of respect that could be earned through performance, composure, and silent strength. Halstead extended a hand, a rare personal gesture. Briggs shook it firmly, meeting the Admiral's gaze without hesitation. In that moment, he felt the culmination of lessons learned under pressure, of judgment tested in real time, of responsibility accepted without complaint. He had passed trials that could have broken him, emerging not only competent but aware of the true essence of leadership. As the formation stood in the sunlight, a gentle breeze rustling uniforms, whispers spread among the ranks. The Marine who had restored communications under fire, who had maintained composure in a high-stakes crisis, had earned the recognition of the highest-ranking officers. No medals, no public announcement, but the acknowledgement was real, tangible in the glances, nods, and quiet respect of colleagues. Briggs exhaled slowly, allowing himself a moment to absorb the magnitude of the experience. Pride had a new meaning now, not the brash confidence of youth, but quiet assurance born from competence, humility, and understanding the consequences of every action. He had been tested, evaluated, and recognized, not for what he thought he could do, but for what he actually accomplished under the pressure of real-world stakes. Halstead's gaze softened, a faint smile appearing for the first time. "Remember this, Marine," he said. "Recognition is earned silently. The world may not see it, but those who matter do. You've proven yourself today." Briggs nodded, heart pounding yet steady, understanding that the Admiral's words were more valuable than any formal commendation. They were an acknowledgement of growth, a validation of his ability to rise under pressure, and a reminder that leadership was measured not in appearances or titles, but in the quiet fulfillment of duty. As Halstead and the Admirals departed, the formation slowly dispersed. Sailors and officers returned to their duties, carrying the awareness that the balance of operations depended on competence, calm, and the willingness to act decisively. Briggs remained at attention, absorbing the lesson fully. He realized that recognition, like leadership, was subtle, earned, and lasting, not given lightly, and far more meaningful than medals or public praise. The sun reflected off the ships, glittering across steel decks and calm waters, a reminder that the world continued, oblivious to the crises narrowly averted. But inside Briggs, the experience had left a permanent mark, a deeper understanding of responsibility, leadership, and the quiet power of respect earned through skill and composure. And as he finally relaxed, shoulders no longer rigid, he understood that this recognition was not the end of his journey. It was the foundation for every future challenge, every future mission, and every decision that would define him as a Marine and as a leader in the years to come. The sun dipped low over Naval Station Norfolk, casting long shadows across the pier. The ocean shimmered like molten steel, reflecting the final light of day, while the fleet remained anchored in precise formations, a silent testament to hours of coordinated effort, meticulous communication, and unwavering discipline. Lance Corporal Ethan Briggs stood at attention, his uniform crisp, his posture perfect, but his mind was far from calm. The past days had reshaped him, testing his nerves, judgment, and resolve. And now, as the last chapter of this operation drew near, he felt the full weight of responsibility and honor converge in the quiet, glowing light. Admiral Halstead appeared at the edge of the pier, flanked once again by the three admirals who had saluted him on arrival. The group's presence was commanding, yet understated. There were no cheers, no fanfare, just quiet authority radiating from men who had carried the weight of fleets, battles, and decades of strategic decision-making. The kind of respect that demanded attention without a word spoken. Briggs felt a shiver run down his spine, the memory of their first encounter returning vividly. The mockery, the arrogance, the sudden realization of the power standing before him. Halstead's gaze settled on Briggs, calm yet piercing. "Marine Briggs," he said, voice carrying across the pier, "stand ready." Briggs stiffened, sensing that the moment had arrived. He had been tested under fire, observed quietly under the most intense scrutiny, and recognized through subtle acknowledgement of his competence. But this moment felt different. It was not about performance under pressure or lessons learned. It was a personal acknowledgement, a transfer of respect from a legend to one who had proven himself worthy. The admirals behind Halstead snapped to attention, their polished shoes clicking against the concrete. The movement was synchronized, a ritual of respect that resonated with authority and tradition. Briggs' chest tightened as he realized what was expected. The salute he had once given, a symbol of deference, was now being returned to him, not by peers, but by men whose careers had shaped the Navy itself. Briggs raised his hand, his salute crisp, unwavering. The breeze tugged at his cover, the sunlight glinting off his insignia, but he held firm. Time seemed to stretch, the pier silent except for the distant lapping of waves and the faint hum of the fleet. Every officer, sailor, and marine in the vicinity instinctively straightened, aware that they were witnessing not just a formal gesture, but the culmination of discipline, skill, and respect earned under pressure. Halstead returned the salute, his movements precise yet relaxed, carrying the weight of decades of command. The gesture was small in motion but monumental in meaning, a transfer of acknowledgement, an unspoken affirmation of Briggs' growth, competence, and understanding of leadership. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Briggs felt the magnitude of the honor, the lessons distilled into a single moment of mutual recognition. He remembered the arrogance of the first encounter, the bluster and immaturity that had marked his early pride. And now he understood. Respect was earned through action, composure, and responsibility, not assumed through bravado or rank. The three admirals behind Halstead mirrored the gesture, saluting in precise, synchronized motion. Briggs returned each salute, feeling the invisible weight of authority acknowledging him, not as a subordinate, but as someone who had proven himself capable under the highest pressure. The pier, the ships, and even the glinting ocean seemed to acknowledge the moment, a quiet stage for an unspoken ceremony of achievement. Halstead lowered his hand slowly, letting the final gesture linger in memory. He nodded to Briggs, faint but unmistakable, a recognition of competence, courage, and growth. "Carry this with you, Marine," he said quietly, yet every syllable resonated. "Remember that respect is never given freely. It is earned. Today you have earned it." Briggs felt an unfamiliar surge of emotion, tempered by the discipline that had carried him through the past days. Pride, yes, but deeper than pride. Understanding, humility, and a quiet confidence born of surviving a trial by fire. He realized that this moment, the salute returned by a legend, was more than ceremonial. It was a bridge between aspiration and achievement, between youthful bravado and true professionalism. As Halstead and the admirals turned and walked toward the waiting SUVs, the fleet and base personnel stood at attention, a silent chorus of acknowledgement. Briggs remained at his post, still saluting, until the figures disappeared from view. Only then did he lower his hand, letting the moment settle in his chest like a heavy but warm weight. Around him, sailors whispered among themselves, eyes wide with quiet admiration. The story of the Marine who had stood firm, restored communications under fire, and earned the acknowledgement of one of the Navy's most legendary figures would ripple through the ranks for years. It was not a tale of heroics in battle, but of discipline, composure, and the quiet courage to act when the stakes were highest. Briggs exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. The sun had dipped lower now, golden light washing over the pier, glinting off hulls and reflecting across calm waters. He realized that the lessons of the past days, the challenge, the assignment, the trial by fire, the quiet mentorship and now recognition, were not moments to boast about but milestones of personal growth. They had transformed him from a brash Marine into someone aware of the weight of responsibility, capable of leadership, and worthy of respect. He straightened once more, scanning the horizon where the fleet lay in disciplined formation, each ship a reminder of teamwork, precision, and trust. The ocean beyond was calm, masking the invisible currents of tension and strategy that had defined the operation, but Briggs felt the pulse of responsibility flowing through him. The salute returned was not just an acknowledgement of his actions, it was a call to continue, to uphold the standards he had glimpsed under pressure, and to carry forward the lessons of discipline, judgment, and quiet courage. As he finally stepped back, saluting the fatting figures one last time, Briggs understood fully. Leadership was not measured in medals or words, but in the quiet acknowledgement of those who understood what it truly took to act when it mattered most. And in that moment, the young Marine who had once questioned authority had been transformed, recognized, and most importantly, ready for every challenge yet to come. The pier settled into a calm rhythm, sunlight fatting, waves lapping gently, and the lesson of the day leaving an indelible mark. Respect is earned, composure is tested, and true leadership shines brightest in the quiet moments of challenge.